Hello, welcome back to Monolith 40k. We've got another tier list video today, and this time we're going to be talking about all of the Lord of War models that are available for Necron players. And we're going to start from the D tier, working our way up to the S tier, otherwise known as the God tier. And there's going to be 6 entries today, and with my own opinion, I'm going to be putting them into those tier groups based on my experiences and my meta, and again, my opinion. But if you do have a different opinion on these units, please put them down in the comments below. Now, when we do put them into a tier group, we're going to be discussing the positive points as well as the negative points, and then explain why they're in that tier group. So to start us off, we're going to be looking at the D tier, and unfortunately, it's going to be the Obelisk. So I personally think this is the worst unit that's available to a Necron player, but let's get into the good to begin with the Obelisk. So it's got 28 wounds, it's toughness 8, and it also has a 2+ armor save. So it makes it very resilient. I mean, even a -3 AP weapon still gives it a 5+ armor save. So it's really resilient in fact, especially with toughness 8 as well. Now it's got that gravity pulse ability. So in the shooting phase, you select an enemy unit that can fly that's within 24 inches of your obelisk. Then until the start of your next shooting phase, you halve the move characteristics of models in that unit. And if it's an aircraft unit, you roll 2d6, and for each point that exceeds the unit's toughness characteristic, they're going to be suffering a mortal wound. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not a huge fan of this ability, but it is still a bonus for the Obelisk. So next it's got the hovering sentinel ability. So in the movement phase, if your obelisk remains stationary, then until the start of the next movement phase, all its Tesla spheres will have assault 6 as opposed to assault 4, and also instead of strength 7, they're going to be going up to strength 8, as well as damage going up to damage 2 instead of damage 1 as well. So a huge boost to the actual Tesla spheres there. Now the fact that you got 4 of these things with now 6 shots per Tesla sphere, that's 24 shots at strength 8 and 2 damage a pop. So it's not too bad at taking away, say, a Space Marine model for example. But you do need to remember that there's no AP, although the 6s will explode. Next it's got the deep strike option, because it's got the death descending ability, so it's effectively deep strike. In your reinforcement step of your movement phases from turn 2 onwards, you can come into the battle more than 9 inches away from enemy models. Now that can be quite difficult, especially with these dense battlefields that are in tournaments and whatnot, but yeah, if you wanted to do that, you've got the option there. The next positive for the Obelisk is the fact that it's a Titanic model, so you do have the option of falling back and still firing your ranged weapons. Now don't get me wrong, you can fire into combat because it's a vehicle model, but if you wanted to select a different target that isn't in engagement range of the Obelisk, then you've got the option there. Now as we just mentioned, it does shoot into combat because it's a vehicle, it also does fly, and again because it's a vehicle, it's got the core keyword. Now as for the bad points, it's got a degrading stat line, so the movement, the ballistic skill as well as the attacks are all going to be affected. Now it's only really the ballistic skill that I've got an issue with here, but you're going to be putting that down as a negative. Now as for the damage output, you're not getting much damage coming from an Obelisk that's worth 300 points, and in fact that's another reason not to take it. It's 300 points. You're not doing much with it, it's quite janky to move around the battlefield, and finally there's no dynasty buffs if you're taking an auxiliary detachment. Now if you're taking a super heavy detachment with 3 Lord of War models, then you will get the dynasty buffs, but the likelihood is you're just taking an auxiliary, or you're just not taking this at all, I guess. So for me, those negative points definitely outweigh all those positives. You can get those positives elsewhere in the codex. Now going on to the next unit in the D tier, we've got the Gorse Pylon. Now this is the big pylon, it's got 30 wounds, toughness 8, and then also any units that are within 6 inches of this Gorse Pylon will receive a 5+ invulnerable save. That's against ranged attacks, so that could be really handy, especially if you've got a large unit of Necron warriors that are defending your deployment zone. Now the weapons are pretty high damage. The Gorse Annihilator for instance is D3 + 6 damage, so not bad on the damage front. Now you do have the option of shooting into combat because it's a vehicle model. However, you're not going to be able to use the focus beam because it's got the blast keyword attached to the actual weapon itself. So that D3 + 6 profile will not be able to be used when in engagement range. You still can use the Flux Arc option, which is rapid fire 6, strength 6, -2 AP 2 damage. Then of course you've got the Tesla Arc as well, which is assault 3d6. Only strength 4, no AP 1 damage, with exploding 6s on top of that. Now oddly, this thing can actually deep strike, although it doesn't have any movement, but it is quite a large model. Again, this can be quite janky, very similar to the Obelisk in fact. Now this thing does hit on a 2+ against aircraft models. Don't get me wrong, aircrafts aren't the worst options, but in terms of scoring points, you don't see them as often as, say, previous editions. And finally, they're a core unit because it's a vehicle model. As for the bad, grading stat line again, so the ballistic skill value goes down to a 4+ and a 5+, pretty standard. It's got absolutely no movement whatsoever, so once it's actually deep struck in or been deployed, that is it. It literally is a sitting duck. It's also not going to be doing anything in combat. It's got no weapon skill, it's got no attack, so if it does get caught in engagement range, yeah, it really is a sitting duck. It can't do anything apart from shoot in the shooting phase. As already mentioned, you can't shoot blast into combat. It's not going to be getting the dynasty buffs in an auxiliary detachment, and in fact I think we missed one of the bullet points. It's very expensive. It's 450 points for a model that simply can't move. I mean, why not just get the Silent King, who's 50 points cheaper and does a hell of a lot more. In fact, we're going to be talking about the Silent King later in this video. So that's why the Gorse Pylon is in the D tier, and in fact that sums up the D tier today. We've got the Obelisk and then the Gorse Pylon. So let's move on to the C tier, and we're going to start off with the Tesseract Bolt. So another large model, 30 wounds, toughness 7 with a 2+ armor save, so again very resilient, very similar to the Obelisk. In fact, it comes from the same kit. I've said this in previous videos, it would be really cool if the Tesseract Bolt and the Obelisk had a profile where it could be like a transport for an actual Catan Shard. Once a Catan Shard pops out, it becomes an Obelisk. Once it's embarked, it becomes a Tesseract Bolt again. I'm sure they could do something with that, but they probably won't, but I'd buy it. Anyway, let's get back onto the actual tier list. So it's got a 4+ invulnerable save, which is something the Obelisk doesn't have. If you wanted to explode this thing, it's got a much easier explosion. It's only a 5+ to explode as opposed to a 6, and it's D6 mortal wounds for anything within 6 inches. Now it knows 4 Catan powers as opposed to the 2 from your standard named Catan shards in the elite section of the codex, and because of the fact that it's a Tesseract Bolt, a lot of the powers are actually more powerful or just easier to achieve. Now it is a Titanic model, so it can fall back and shoot, so therefore you're going to be selecting your targets, or you just shoot into combat because it's a vehicle model, and because it is a vehicle model, it's got the core keyword. As for the bad, it's got a degrading stat line, so the movement, the bliss skill and the attacks, again very similar to some previous models in this video, so they all get degraded. It's got no command protocols. Because it's a Catan Shard model, it doesn't receive any other command protocols, so that's unfortunate there. It's quite difficult to move because it's quite a large model. Now the base itself isn't that big, but the actual hull of the Tesseract Bolt is pretty big, so moving around larger ruins and things isn't that straightforward to do. Now the damage output from the ranged weapons itself isn't really that great. You've got 4 Tesla spheres, that's going to be 16 shots at strength 7 with exploding 6s, no AP, 1 damage. You're not doing a lot with that, especially against power armor and elite kind of factions. Then finally, as already mentioned in some previous entries, no dynasty buffs if you're taking an auxiliary detachment. So that's the only option we're going to go with in terms of the C tier. Let's move on to the B tier, and we're going to start off with the Seraptic Heavy Construct. So this is our big spider model, pretty cool looking model. Now it's got 28 wounds, toughness 8 with a 5+ invulnerable save, so another resilient model from the Lord of War section. Now this model actually has weapon options, so you're either taking the 2 Singularity Generators, or you can swap them out for 2 Synaptic Obliterators and 2 Transdimensional Projectors. So this thing's strong at range, but it's also strong in melee. It's going to have the Titanic forelimbs, which also has 2 profiles. So you're either going to strength 16, -3 AP and 5 damage with the Impaling Strike profile, or with the Reaping Sweep, you're going with strength 8, -1 AP and 2 damage, but you're getting double the amount of attacks, so you're going up to 12 attacks. So multifunctional, going up against all types of units, at range, in melee, it's doing the business. Now it's got the Titanic keyword, so we're not talking about from the core rulebook here, it's got an actual ability called Titanic. So this model is eligible to declare a charge in a turn in which it fell back. And each time it makes a normal move, advances or falls back, it can move across other models, excluding monsters and vehicles, as if they were not there. So quite similar to our Canoptic Wraiths being able to fall back and charge, and being able to ghost through models as if they weren't there, unless they're a monster or vehicle. And don't forget what being an actual Titanic model actually does, it just means they simply can fall back and shoot. So it can fall back and shoot, and it can also fall back and charge. So that's pretty cool. Now this thing's actually got a 12-inch movement, so for such a large model, you would expect it to be a little bit slower than that, but it's got a 12-inch movement, and it's got core as well, so it can be buffed up with, say, the Silent King. That'd be really cool. Now as for the bad, degrading stat line again. This time it's the movement, the weapon skill and the bliss skill that gets affected. All 3 of those are quite important to this kind of model, so you've got to bear that in mind. It's 600 points, it's our most expensive model available to the Necrons. It's quite pricey, you're not going to be using it in a 1000 point game. I mean, I suppose you could take the Silent King and the Seraptic Heavy Construct, and that's your whole 1000 points, but you're probably not going to win anything, it's not going to be that competitive, but that would be kind of a cool idea. Then finally, no dynasty buffs if you're taking an auxiliary detachment again. So there's another unit in the B tier for me today, and it's going to be the Monolith. Now I quite like the Monolith, it's been a bit of a flagship unit for the Necrons throughout the years. Now it's got 24 wounds, toughness 8 with a 2+ armor save, so pretty resilient, quite standard with all these Lord of War models. It's got weapon options, we all love weapon options, so you're either taking the 4 Death Rays, which are strength 9, -3 AP and D3 +3 damage. We all love that as well, D3 +3, we need a bit more of that in our Necron Codex. But you can swap those out with 4 Gorse Flux Arcs, which are rapid fire 3, strength 5, minus 2 AP and 1 damage. So you've got a potential 24 shots at 15-inch range there, mainly to pick off light infantry models. Further to add to that, he's got the particle whip, which is strength 12, minus 3 AP and 3 damage. So it's pretty strong at range. It's actually pretty strong in melee as well. People wouldn't think that it's that strong in melee, but with 6 attacks that automatically hit at strength 8, minus 3 AP and 3 damage, that's pretty nasty. This thing can literally swallow up Terminator models. So it's got a few other little tricks up its sleeve. So it's Titanic, so you can fall back and shoot, selecting your unit. It can deep strike. Something you want to be considering when you're taking the Monolith is using the Prismatic Dimensional Breach stratagem for a command point. And a core unit that are in strategic reserves can literally pop out of the Monolith. And as long as they're holding within 3 inches of the Monolith itself, they can pop out just a few inches away from an enemy unit. So that could be a unit of Scorpion Destroyers, for example, and you're pretty much guaranteeing the charge move there. Now something very similar it has is the Eternity Gate ability. So in your movement phase, if the model remains stationary, then in the reinforcement step of this phase, you summon a unit. Again, it's going to be a core infantry unit from strategic reserve, so it's virtually the same as the stratagem that I've just mentioned, the Prismatic Dimensional Breach. However, if you're using the actual stratagem, it means you can move the Monolith first and then use the stratagem, whereas the Eternity Gate restricts your actual movement with the Monolith. Now there's even more shenanigans in terms of movement from the Dimensional Corridor stratagem for a command point. Again, it's a core infantry model. You select one that's on the battlefield and you can pretty much suck them up off the battlefield and then ping them out within 3 inches of the Monolith. However, this time they will need to be more than 9 inches away from enemy models. But that's a real tactical option. You could be moving models around, especially if this thing's got deep strike. So you deep strike your Monolith, suck up some Necron warriors that are in your deployment zone and bring them out at a completely different area of the battlefield. And then finally, we've got to mention, because it's a vehicle, it's got the core keyword. Now as for the bad, the grading stats again, as you'd expect, the movement, the ballistic skill and the attacks all get affected here. All of them are quite important for the Monolith. Now this thing does not have the fly keyword, which I think is a bit crazy. It is virtually flying for me. I'm pretty sure it used to have the fly keyword in old editions, but it doesn't now. So that makes it quite difficult to be moving around terrain, moving around barricades and things like that. You've literally got to go around terrain. You can't just simply fly over something. And like all the previous entries today, no dynasty buffs if you're taking the auxiliary detachment. So that's the B tier, the Seraptic Heavy Construct and the Monolith. Now we're on to the A tier. I've got nothing for you in the A tier, so we're going to pretty much skip straight to the S tier. And you kind of already know where this is going. It's for the Silent King. Now, you've probably seen already on the screen, there's a lot of positive reasons for taking the Silent King. So we're going to go through all these. I'm not going to bother with the negatives because there's that many positives to talk about. They massively outweigh any negatives you can think of. So first of all, you're going to be gaining 3 command points simply for taking the Silent King. Absolutely fabulous. It means pre-game you could be spending them on warlord traits, relics or whatever you fancy really, because in this chapter approved we've got half the amount of starting CP for the game. Now there's lots of buffs, all the My Will Be Done bonuses, all the rerolls to hit rolls, rerolls to wound rolls, and they also work on himself because he's core, which is kind of crazy. He's got lots of different weapon options. The Annihilation Beams is 2 of those, Staff of Stars, Scepter of Eternal Glory, Scythe of Dust, Staff of Stars. There's just a lot of different weapon options that kind of work against all different types of units. It could be horde units, it could be elite units. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife, he has virtually everything. There's multiple ways to heal the Silent King now. If you're using Canoptic Spiders from the Zerican Dynasty, they can heal with their Fabricator Claw Array because it's a vehicle model. You can bring a Technomancer from the same Dynasty code, which will allow him to revive one of the Tricorn Miniers with an Annihilation Beams. Also, that Technomancer can use a Canoptic Cloak to heal D3 lost wounds as well. Illuminazares can also bring back an Annihilation Beam, and he doesn't need to be within the same Dynasty code. Well, in fact, he doesn't have a Dynasty code, so it means your main Dynasty could be something completely different. So there's lots of ways to heal him. He's an anti-psyker, so he can deny 1 psychic power as if he was a psyker. He's got the Fight First ability. He's got the 4+ invulnerable save. He's got the Noble keyword, so that's going to be really handy for the secondary objective, Code of Combat, because he's going to be absolutely annihilating units, scoring a lot of points that way, and potentially returning CP as well. All 3 of the models within the unit have got the Fly keyword, they've got the Core keyword. In fact, those Annihilation Beams from the Tricorn Miniers, they're taking the damage first, so this almost ensures that your Silent King is going to be the last man standing in the unit. I mean, he has to be anyway, because if he does get destroyed, then the Tricorn Miniers go anyway. Now he's got the Fair Run ability, so that My Will Be Done ability is going to be used on 2 different units, which I quite like. I like flanking him with 2 completely different core units. He can also manipulate the command protocols, which is with his warlord trait. And then finally, he's got a combined total of 26 wounds. Now the actual model itself isn't 26 wounds, so that doesn't make him Titanic. So he still can be used in obscuring terrain and things like that. But a combined total for the unit is 26 wounds, which is pretty good. All that for just 400 points. So that's the S tier all dealt with. In fact, let me just show you what my final tier list looks like from the Lord of War section of the Necron faction. So yeah guys, let me know if you agree with my tier list. Put down in the comments below if you've got any disagreements. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.